Hello everyone, I'm Rogério and I'm going to present the paper Increasing Player Engagement, Retention and Performance through the Inclusion of Educational Content in the Citizen Science Game. Before we talk about our study and our findings, I will start talking about our motivation. Games have evolved in terms of their gameplay, way of motivation and communication with the player, as well as all the hardware and software technology that comes with this industry. However, games have also been used as a tool for a purpose other than entertainment. One example of games that are not used only for entertainment are the games with a purpose, or GWAP. A GWAP is a game whose main purpose is to complete a task that is hard for computers but easier for humans. The ESP Game was the pioneer in that field. In this game, players type in words that describe the image, and they win the game as soon as they suggest the same word. These words are usually very good labels for the image, and labeling image was considered a difficult task for a computer at that time. Games with a purpose based on scientific problems are also called citizen science games. The first step for adding a game component to a citizen science project is to translate the problem into puzzles that are more accessible to players who do not have the necessary scientific background for completing the original task. Citizen science games vary a lot in their level of abstraction, which means how transformed or simplified the in-game puzzles are from the initial problem. Foldit is a very famous citizen science game in genomics. It is a game in which the players fold proteins, and the problem is about predicting protein folding following complex biochemistry rules. These games stay very close to the original data and scientific problem. Phylo is another good example of a citizen science game in genomics. It's a game in which players align colored blocks, try to maximize the matches, minimize the gaps and mismatches between them. It's a gamified version of the multiple sequence alignment, or MSA problem. The MSA is a problem in bioinformatics aimed to find the best alignment of 3 or more biological sequences of similar length. Phylo is a good example of a game that is a lot more abstracted from the initial scientific problem. Games with puzzles that are relatively similar to the problem of interest can better motivate and engage players who are interested in science, whereas more abstract games have the advantage of simply being more accessible to a larger audience. Our motivation is to develop ways to give back to the citizen science game players and engage them more in science. We want to achieve that by adding educational content in a citizen science game that has a high level of abstraction for the original problem. I will show GeSort, the game we used in our study. GeSort is a citizen science game based on the genome sorting problem. The genome sorting problem is a problem in bioinformatics in which, given two genomes, or two gene orders, the goal is to find the evolutionary history, the shortest sequence of evolutionary events that could transform one genome into another. GeSort is a puzzle match game in which we have two rows of colored shapes, and the goal is to transform the mutable row in the target row through 3 available operations: duplication, deletion, and inversion. Each row represents a genome, or a gene order, and each colored shape represents one gene. The 3 operations represent common evolutionary events that can transform a genome during the evolution. We know the human brain is very good to recognize patterns, so the GeSort's goal is to compare the sequence of moves used by the players to solve the puzzles. The player starts the level with score 0. Every time the player performs an operation, also called move, their score is increased by 1. The goal is to solve the puzzle with as few moves as possible. For this study, we designed a built-in encyclopedia called CODEX. It is possible to access it by clicking on the small white book icon on the bottom right of the screen. In this image, you can see the CODEX open in the game, showing one of its entries. We started by conducting a preliminary study to investigate which format would be the best for adding educational content in the citizen science game. For the sake of time, we will go over this briefly. We selected 3 different formats: text with figures, cartoons, and videos. An expert in bioinformatics prepared 3 topics related to the genome sorting problem. We prepared 3 versions of each topic, using 3 select formats. We recruited participants for a within subject study, in which each participant interacted with the 3 select formats. This figure has a summary of our findings in the preliminary study. We asked the participants what was their favorite educational format. The answers are summarized on the left side of the figure, the green area. The majority of the participants said that they prefer videos. Now let's take a look at the right side of this figure. We measure the knowledge gain of the participants through a pre-test before they were having contact with the educational material, and a few quizzes we called post-tests after having interacted with the educational material. Our evaluation of the knowledge gain suggests that they learned more using the text with figures. However, these differences were not statistically significant. Besides asking which was their favorite format in the study, we also asked more questions like which format they preferred to learn something new, and in general, the answers were varied. A deeper analysis is definitely needed, but it was evident from the preliminary study that we are not getting a clear consensus. Consequently, we decided to use the text format because the learning outcomes were slightly better, and it was also easier to integrate into the game. Now that we have chosen the format, it's time to study the effects of adding educational content in the citizen science game on retention, engagement, and performance. We did that using two different strategies for presenting the educational content: full access and gradual access linked to progress in the game. For the main study, our research questions were: does presenting educational content gradually or all at once affect players' retention in the game? Does presenting educational content gradually or all at once has an effect on the player engagement with the CODEX and the game in general? Does presenting educational content gradually or all at once affect players' performance in the game? This was an online between subject study. We recruited participants using two social media platforms, Facebook and Twitter, and a citizen science portal, SciStarter. The participants were directed to a recruiting page with detailed information about the study. The first step was to register for the game and play the tutorial. Before playing the game, the participants was asked to answer the demographic survey. We asked the participants to play 11 levels. After finishing playing level 11, the game asked the participants to answer a second survey. The game had 30 levels and the participants were free to keep playing if they wanted. We recruited 96 participants and they were split into 3 groups. Control group had no access to the educational content. Knowledge group had full access to the educational content since the beginning. Curiosity group, they unlocked one educational content every 3 levels played. They also received a visual stimulus. 28 participants dropped before accomplishing all the tasks, resulting in 68 participants, almost even distributed. 55 participants answered both surveys. We measured retention by looking at the average number of levels played. As you can see, the curiosity group participants played more levels on average than the others. These differences were statistically significant. The engagement was measured by the average time spent interacting with the educational content. The participants in the curiosity group spent significantly longer interacting with the educational content than the others. The player starts each puzzle with score 0. After each move, the score is increased by 1. The game is similar to golf, where you try to minimize the score. Each puzzle had a top score, which means an achievable minimum number of moves to solve the puzzle. Participants received points according to the difference between their score and the top score. For each puzzle, the players were rewarded with 50 points if their score was greater than the top score, 100 points if their score was equal to the top score, 150 or more points if their score was lower than the top score. To evaluate performance, we compared the points obtained by the players on the first 11 levels. However, there was no statistically significant difference between the 3 groups. We evaluated the outcomes of having access to the educational content, but does that guarantee that the players interacted with it? We decided to regroup the participants in 2 distinct categories: the reader group, formed by the participants who interacted with the educational content for at least 60 seconds, and the non-reader group, with those who didn't. We chose the 60 seconds threshold because it was the time needed to read one CODEX entry. As you can see, the reader group obtained more points on average than the non-reader group. This average was calculated for the first 11 levels only, because all the participants were required to complete them. There was statistically significant difference in the points obtained by the reader and non-reader groups, which showed that the players who spent more time reading the codex performed better in the game. The results indicate that educational content in the citizen science game can have a positive effect on retention, engagement, and performance. However, it's also clear that not just a matter of including scientific content in the game, but also find the right approach to present it. Retention, as measured by the total number of levels played, was higher for participants in the curiosity group only. It could be related to the fact that the curiosity approach was engaging more participants to spend more time in the CODEX. The gradual access to the educational content as a reward, among other things, could explain why the participants played more. Many factors could play a role in this increasing engagement with the educational content and the game with the curiosity approach. Giving them more access to the educational content as they progress in the game could have created a sense of a reward. Unlocking new entry in the codex for every 3 completed level potentially created a micro-diversion, which was beneficial for keeping players interested in the game. As educational content was presented in a logical order, and each entry had information related and complementary to the previous one, this could have enabled the participants to feel that their knowledge on those subjects was increasing proportionally to their progress in the game, effectively shortening the knowledge gap. The results suggest that interacting with the education material for a minimum amount of time can help in improve players' performance, as the average number of points per level was significantly higher for readers. Moreover, there was significant correlation between the amount of time spent in the codex and the average number of points obtained per level. We observed that there are more efficient ways than others to present scientific content in the game. The only approach that had an effect on retention was the one called curiosity, in which players were given gradual access with a visual cue to the content as they progress in the game. Similarly, players were more engaged with the education material and the game in the curiosity group. In terms of performance in the game, we observed that the players who interacted for more than 60 seconds with the scientific content obtained more points per level, and there was a significant correlation between time spent reading and points obtained. Future work should be devoted to finding other potentially more efficient approaches to integrate educational content into citizen-science games. Deeper analysis of different types of educational material formats and how they can be connected to the main gameplay loop should be conducted. Investigating how exactly the gradual release of scientific information, such as in the curiosity condition, can act as a guide to help players progress in the game would also be interesting. These results highlight the importance of explaining the science behind the citizen science games, even in the context of a game that's more abstract from the original scientific problem. Including educational content in these games can be beneficial for all parties involved. On the one hand, it can help citizen science game developers by retaining players longer and improving solution quality. On the other hand, the users can feel more engaged in the game, learn about science, and better appreciate the importance of their contribution. Thank you. Please play our game.